Hansel and Gretel. There was once a woodcutter who lived on the edge of the great forest with his wife and their 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name was Gretel. They were always poor, but now there was famine in the land, and they had almost nothing to eat. One night, as the father lay awake, his mind full of worries and trouble, he said to his wife, "What will become of us all? How can we feed our poor children?" "Listen to me, husband," said the wife. "Tomorrow morning we will take the children into the thickest part of the forest. We will light a fire and give them each a piece of bread. Then we will leave them alone. They will never find the way back, and we will be rid of them." "No, no, wife," said the man. "We can't do that. We could never leave my children alone in the forest. They could be torn to pieces by wild animals." "What a fool you are," said the wife. "Do you want all 4 of us to die? You might as well start this minute preparing the wood for the coffins." On and on she went until he stopped arguing. All right, he said, "but I'm very unhappy about your plan." Now the children, laying awake through hunger, heard this conversation. Gretel began to cry. "All is over with us now," she lamented. "Hush," said Gretel. "Don't cry. I'll think of a way of saving us." When the parents had gone to sleep at last, Hansel got up and put on his little coat and quietly slept outside. The moon shone so brightly that the white pebbles round the house glittered like newly minted silver coins. Hansel stooped down and stuffed his pocket with little stones until they could hold no more. Then he went back to Gretel. "Don't worry," he told her. "Go to sleep. God won't forsake us." And he lay down again. But not for long. At earliest dawn, before the sun had risen, the woman shook them awake. "Get up, you lazy bones," she shouted. "We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave them each a piece of bread, saying, "Now, this is your dinner. Mind you, don't eat it too soon, for you will get no more." Gretel took charge of the bread, since Hansel's pockets were filled with stones. Then they all started out. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stopped. He seemed to be looking back. He did this again. Then again. "Hansel, what are you stopping for?" said the father. "You're wasting time. What are you looking at?" "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I'm just looking at the white cat on the roof. I think he's saying goodbye to me." "Foolish boy," said the mother. "That's no cat. It's the sun shining on the chimney." But Hansel hadn't been looking at the cat. Each time he stopped, he had laid down a white pebble. At last they reached the middle of the forest. "Now, children," said the father, "gather some wood and we will make a fire." Hansel and Gretel collected twigs and made a large pile. A fire was lit, and the woman said, "Now, you two sit by the fire and rest a while. When we finished our wood cutting, we'll come back and fetch you." So the two children sat by the blaze and ate their little piece of bread. They thought their father was nearby because they could hear the sound of an axe. Thud, thud, thud. It was no axe, though. The sound came from the branch which the man had tied to a dead tree so that the wind would blow it backwards and forward. They sat there waiting for so long that they began to close their eyes. Soon they were fast asleep. When they woke, it was dark night. Gretel again began to cry. "How shall we ever get out of the wood?" she asked. "Don't cry," said Hansel. "Wait until the moon rises. Then we will find our way." As soon as the moon rose, Hansel took his sister's hand and flew through the shining path of pebbles. At the daybreak they reached their home. They knocked at the door and mother opened it. "Quickly," she said, "you bad children, why did you stop so long in the woods? We thought you must be lost." She was angry at their return. The father, though, was delighted. He had never wished to leave them in the woods. But the family was still desperately poor. One night, the children heard the mother say, "All we have left is half a loaf of bread. This time we must take those two even further into the forest so that they won't find the way back. There is nothing else to be done." The father shook his head. "We will do better to share our last with the children." But the wife reminded him that he had given it once. How could he now refuse? "You might as well as stop arguing," she declared. What could he do? The children heard all this, and once again Hansel planned to collect the white stones. When the parents left, he crept to the door, but it was locked. Well, another idea came into his mind. Long before sunrise, the mother rose the children for an early start to the forest. Each child was given a tiny piece of bread to last for the day. Hansel broke up the bread in his pocket. This was his new plan, and carefully dropped a line of crumbs as they walked. "What are you stopping for?" asked the father. "Why do you keep looking back?" "Oh, I was looking at the dove on the roof. It seemed to be saying goodbye to me." "Foolish boy," said the mother. "That's no dove, it's the morning sun shining on the chimney." Hansel still managed to drop the last of the crumbs. They had by now reached a dense part of forest, further than they had ever been before. Again, a fire was made, and the mother said, "Stay where you are, you two, and if you are tired, go to sleep for a while. When we have finished our work, we will come and collect you." The children had to share Gretel's bread, since Hansel's had been used to mark the way home. By evening, no one had came to fetch them. At last they all fell asleep. It was quite dark when they woke, but Hansel said, "Don't worry, Gretel. When the moon rises, the bread crumbs will show us the way home." The moon rose, but where were the crumbs? They had been eaten every one by the forest birds. "We'll find the way," said Hansel, but it was not so easy. Wherever they walked, they still seemed to be in the heart of the wood. On the third day, hungry and exhausted, they began to despair. But at midday, their luck seemed to change. They saw in the tree lovely snow-white bird. It began to sing so beautifully that they stopped to listen. Then it fluttered around them and started to fly further into the woods. They followed the bird and saw it, alight on the roof of a tiny cottage in the clearing. A strange cottage, indeed. The walls were made of bread or cake. The roof was of gingerbread, and the windows were of sparkling sugar. "This will suit us," said Hansel. "I'll have a piece of the roof, and you try a window." He reached up and broke off a piece of the gingerbread roof, while Gretel began to taste the corner of the window sugar. But what was this voice calling out from the cottage? It was saying, "Nibble, nibble, mouse skin, who's nibbling my house skin?" The children looked at each other, then replied, "Only the wind, nothing more. The wind is nibbling at your door." And they boldly went on eating. Hansel took the large piece of the roof, while Gretel pushed out one of the small round planes of the window sugar and sat on the ground to enjoy it. All at once the door opened and an old woman, supporting herself on the crutch, came hobbling about. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they dropped what they held in their hands. But the old woman only shook her head and said, "Oh, dear children, who brought you here? Come in and stay with me. You will come to no harm." She took them by the hand and led them into the little house. A nice dinner was set before them: pancakes and sugar, milk, apples and nuts. After this, she showed them two little white beds into which they crept, and felt as they were in heaven. Although the old woman appeared to be so friendly, she was really a wicked old witch who was on the watch for children, and she had built the bread house on purpose to lure them to her. Whenever she could get a child into her clutches, she cooked it and ate it, and considered it a grand feast. Witches have red eyes and can't see very far, but they have keen scent like animals, and can perceive the approach of human beings. When Hansel and Gretel came near her, she laughed to herself and said scornfully, "Now I have them. They shouldn't escape me." She got up early in the morning before the children were awake, and when she saw them asleep, she murmured to herself, "They will be dainty mortals. First the boy." Seizing Hansel with her bony hand, she carried him off to a little stable, where she shut him with the very door. He might shriek as loud as he liked. She took no notice. When she went to Gretel and shook her till she woke, and cried, "Get up, little lazy bones. Fetch some water and cook something nice for your brother. He's in the stable and has to be fattened. When he's nice and fat, we will eat him." Gretel began to cry bitterly, but it was no use. She had to obey the witch's orders. The best food was now cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel only had the shells of the crayfish. The old woman hobbled to the stable every morning and cried, "Hansel, put your finger out for me to feel how fat you are." Hansel puts out a little bone, and the old woman, whose eyes were dim, could not see, and thought it was his fingers, and she was much astonished that he had not get fat. When 4 weeks had passed, and Hansel still kept thin, she became very impatient and would wait no longer. Now, then Gretel, she cried, bustle along and fetch the water. Fat or thin, tomorrow Hansel will be my dinner. Oh, how this poor little sister grieved. As she carried the water, the tears streamed down her cheeks. Dear God, help us, she cried. If only the wild animals in the forest has devoured us, we would at least have died together. You may spare your lamentation. They will do you no good, said the old woman. Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out to fill the great kettle with water, and then she had to kindle a fire and hang the kettle over it. We will bake first, said the old witch. I have heated the oven and kneaded the dough. She pushed poor Gretel towards the oven and said, creep in and see if it is properly heated, and then we will put the bread in. She meant when Gretel had got in to shut the door and roast her. But Gretel saw her intention and said, I don't know how to get in, how I to manage it. Stupid girl, cried the witch. The opening is big enough. You can see that I could get into it but myself. She hobbled up and stuck her head into the oven, but Gretel gave her a push which she sent the witch right in, and then she banged the door and bolted it. And that was the end of the witch. Then Gretel ran as fast as she could to the stable, opened the door, and cried out, Hansel, we are saved. The old witch is dead. Hansel sprang out like a bird from a cage when the door is set open. How delighted they were! They fell upon each other's necks and kissed each other and danced about for joy. As that had nothing more to fear, they went into the witch's house and found chests in every corner full of pearls and precious stones. These are better than pebbles, said Hansel, as he filled his pockets. Gretel said, I must take some home with me too, and she filled her apron. Now, we must go, said Hansel. We have to find a way out of the magic power of this wood. Before they had gone very far, they came to a great piece of water. We can't get across it, said Hansel. I can see no stepping stones and no bridge, and there are no boats either, answered Gretel. But there is a duck swimming. It will help us over if we ask it. So she cried, Here, a needy pair we stand. No bridge or boat is near at hand. Gentle duck, that cries, "Quack, quack, will you take us on your back?" The duck came swimming towards them, and Hansel got on its back and told his sister to sit on his knee. "No," answered Gretel, "it will be too heavy for the duck. It must take us over one after another." The good creature did this, and when they got safely over and walked for a while, the wood seemed to grow more and more familiar to them, and at last they saw their father's cottage in the distance. They began to run and rushed inside, where they threw their arms round their father's neck. The man had not a single happy moment since he had divorced his children in the wood. And in the meantime, his wife had died. Gretel shook her apron and scattered the pearls and precious stones all over the floor. And Hansel added handful after handful out of his pockets. So all their troubles came to an end, and they lived together happily ever after.